2 weeks ago, we started our series called We Are, and it's a journey through our identity in Christ. So many times you hear, if you've grown up in the church, you hear about how you're brothers and sisters in Christ, you are sons and daughters of a king, you're princes, you're princesses. But what does that mean? What does that entail? Okay, great, I have this kingship or this queenship, if you're a girl, that now I have inherited. What does that mean? Who's God? Where are we going to here? But 2 weeks ago, we got into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We talked about how they stood strong within the fire. They were thrown into the fiery furnace. They withstood the fire as they went through, as they met Jesus within the fire. Now, we also talked about Peter and how he stepped out of the boat, how he took that step of faith, pursuing after the Lord. But ultimately, we dialogued about just how we might have to have Christ as the cornerstone or as our foundation for our lives. And he makes our identity unshakable. And that's where we took on the identity. We are unshakable. But tonight we look to add to that identity. And as you can see, I threw up the picture here. Tonight we are freedom. There's ownership there. You're taking ownership of what you have. You're taking ownership of a gift given to you, freely given. I want to start by reading Galatians 5:1. It says, "It is freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." So I want to give you guys a little background on these verses here. First of all, understand this is a letter written to a church in the New Testament, but it's the early church, Church of Galatia, actually. And it's written by Paul, one of the greatest minds that certainly Christian theology has ever seen, but I would say even the world has ever seen. His ability to comprehend the incomprehensible of God and his attributes and who he is, it's astounding. But in this specific letter, he's teaching about how salvation by works and how the Church of Galatia was preaching that actually you can get to heaven by works. So if I'm a good person, I can get to heaven. But as the Bible teaches, and as we know, the only way to heaven is through Christ. But as we focus in on Galatians 5:1 here, guys, I want to stay contextually sound while illustrating my point here. But I want to show you the point that Paul, I believe, was making. And not only explaining that Christ has set us free, but also that we embody freedom. And that we take on freedom as part of our identity. Tonight, I hope that we will prove that we are freedom due to the sovereignty of who God is. We're going to get into the sovereignty of God tonight. And we'll add to the freedom attribute that has been given to us by Christ. So I want to start off tonight by reading you guys a couple verses. It's a story. I'm sure you guys love stories. It's Exodus 14:21-30. Bear with me here. I'm just going to read it to you. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud, looking down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. As the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all of the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained, but the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their left and on their right. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. If you've grown up in church, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Moses parting the Red Sea. It's a great story. I think it's something that we don't take seriously sometimes. I think it's a story that we look at as just a story, a fable, a tale. It's something that actually happened. These are biblical accounts. But I want to give you a little background to the verses I just read. Understand that the Israelites, the main people in these verses, they were enslaved for over 400 years up to this point in their lives. God sends Moses, a man who had been part of the Egyptian culture, cast out, and then brought back to redeem them. The Lord sends the plagues, and then you have Passover, and that's where the Jewish people get the Passover, and there's so many different things that go on leading up to this point that's a little too much to go into tonight. But finally, it comes to the point where Pharaoh releases the Israelites. And a few days later, after releasing them, Pharaoh says, okay, go, I'm done with your plagues, I'm done with all this stuff going on, I release you. And he regrets his decision. You see, the Israelites were a huge slave force. They said, there's accounts that say that there were close to 1 million people within the land of Egypt, and they were building the pyramids, the sphinxes, they were building the houses, they were doing everything. They were cultivating the land, they were getting the goods and bringing it to the market to give it to the Egyptians. They were doing everything. You think of having like a maid in your house, that's everyone had a maid in their house. You know, this was something that made the Egyptian culture that much greater because they didn't have to get their hands dirty with anything. So understand that basically the Israelites were just stomped on for 400 years in this land. But understand, okay, so Pharaoh says, I actually want you guys back. I let you go. And now I see, man, life isn't quite as good. I actually have to do stuff. And he sends his armies, his chariots, his horsemen, as we read, after the Israelites. And at this point, the Israelites have been traveling out of the land of Egypt, and as you can imagine, close to 1 million people, it's going to take a while for everyone to get out. So what ends up happening is that you have the people, and they run into the Red Sea. And the Red Sea is located kind of in Saudi Arabia, kind of off to the side, look it up. But they get to the Red Sea, and as soon as they get there, they turn around, and they see Pharaoh's chariots and his horsemen coming across the Saudi Arabian desert. And they're pinned between an army that wants to take them back into captivity, and then they have the Red Sea in front. An insurmountable amount of water. There's a sea. There's an ocean. But Moses calls out to God. And God instructs Moses to split the seas. He's like, come on, Moses, I'm God. Split the seas. Go. So he instructs Moses to command the seas to split. And guys, just imagine what's going on. Moses is like, all right, he says he lifted his staff. He says, basically seas split, and then you have the power, and you have the immensity of God, and you have the wind and the rushing water. It says the wind was blowing all night, and then you wake up, and there's these walls of water and an aisle in between the water. Like, imagine seeing that. And then not only to walk through it, but on dry ground. I don't know if you guys have ever, been in a swampy area when the tide goes down and the water's receded. It's all kind of nasty and gooey, and you maybe have to wear boots and it's getting all over you. No, they walked on dry ground. Just another way that God is awesome, really. But then as you see at the end, God returns the seas back. As the Israelites were walking through, by the time they got through, the Egyptian army had been in. So the God just, and they were gone. They were dead. And like I said before, if you grew up in church, you guys have heard this story. You've seen the movies, you've watched the VeggieTales about it. What?
Prince of Egypt.
Prince of Egypt, yes. Coat of Many Colors. It's a great movie. I haven't watched it in a while. Movie night. And it's a great characteristic of the Bible, or it illustrates the characteristics of the Bible, because I believe it's an account that has so many layers to it. There's things that we can keep pulling from it. Each time you read it, you notice something different. And I believe that the Lord wants to illustrate something new and something refreshing to us through this story tonight. But let's evaluate this biblical account. Okay, it's something that it occurred and then it was written several hundred years later. They say that Moses lived maybe another 100 years, not really sure, there's not really an account of it, but then he wrote it and he wrote the account. But the first thing I want you guys to notice in this is the sovereignty of God. Him orchestrating the entire story from Pharaoh and the Egyptians to the Israelite people, redeeming them, orchestrating Moses' life, leaving the land, and then the Lord bringing him back. You meet the burning bush at that point, and bringing them back and redeeming the people. The Lord orchestrating their lives. So the first point I want to make tonight, guys, that God is sovereign. It says in Psalms 135, whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and on earth, in the seas and all the deeps. Sovereign. He's supreme. He's all-knowing, omniscient, eternal. Just some characteristics, some definitions. He orchestrates all things. He's the author and the finisher of our faith. He can harden one's heart, as he did with Pharaoh. It says a couple verses earlier there that he hardened Pharaoh's heart to cast out the Israelites. But then he can also soften ones, as mine was softened. I can attest to that, to pursue salvation. God is sovereign, and you can't argue with that, because if God is not sovereign, you take the sovereignty away from God, then you take God away from God. You can't have a sovereign God. If he's not sovereign, then he's not God. Simple as that. I've been approached with questions just at different times or whatever, and especially from my non-Christian friends. I went to Suffolk Community College for 2.5 years, my super sophomore year. And I was always approached with the question, and it was kind of like these theologically or kind of like philosophically, like no way to answer these questions. And I'm sure you guys have heard this, but you get approached with the question, could your God make a rock so big that he couldn't lift it? It's not like that. It's not how this all works. You're so off. But you guys, you can answer that question with the sovereignty of God. Let me explain. See, God's sovereignty, as we described earlier, logically it implies that he can do anything. You guys can agree with that? But let's be more specific. God's sovereignty does not mean he could do anything. Follow me here. But it means he could do anything he wills to do. See, God's sovereignty and his will, they're bound together. The sovereignty of God does not mean that God can lie. For God does not will to lie. You guys following me here? His will and his sovereignty are bound together. He does what he wills and he wills what he does. But if he does not will to do it, then he doesn't do it.
Wow, that was a mouthful.
Let me get into it a little bit more. God is sovereign simply because he does whatever he wills to do. You guys got that? Okay? God is sovereign simply because he wills to do what he does. So when the question is posed, the answer is this, okay? God is sovereign, therefore he wills, therefore he does what he wills, and what he wills he does. Because he is sovereign, he can make a rock too heavy for him to lift, and then lift it. Okay? So because he is sovereign, he can make a rock too big for him to lift it, and then he can go lift it. You guys are confused? It's a good thing. Trying to understand God right now. Might be a little theological, but it illustrates the point I'm going to make in a couple minutes here. See, another aspect of God's sovereignty that we see displayed through the Israelites is his freedom. And that's really what I want to get into tonight. Kind of what we just established was the basic concept of sovereignty. And I want to get a little more specific. Because God is sovereign, it also means that he is freedom. And anyone who associates with God also gains that same freedom. And if you've made that decision to follow Christ, you will experience that same freedom that falls under his sovereignty. You see, you are co-heirs with Christ. That's what we learned 2 weeks ago when we had our first part of this series. But since you are co-heirs, you then receive the gifts that Christ received. You're co-heirs with Christ. You get the same gifts that Jesus did. When you know Jesus, you know freedom. This is in John 8:32. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. See, guys, there will be things in this life that bind us up, that tie us down. There will be sins, there will be physical diseases, friends or family at times, things that come against us in this life. You guys know what you're talking about. It comes to your mind as soon as this topic is approached. And I believe if we're really honest with ourselves tonight, there's times where we're just scared. We're just intimidated by the situation that we're approaching, the situation that is within our path. The Red Sea that has seemed to come up as we're trying to escape the thing the Lord has redeemed us from. You see, there's times when you look and you see the Egyptians, they're bearing down on you. They're coming after you. You're unsure in the decision you have to make. God, where do I go? Oh, what do we do? Oh, here. Oh, Pastor, what do you do here? Oh, Dad, Mom, what do we do? What do we do? But when you know God, you know His sovereignty over every situation and the freedom that comes with it. And I encourage you guys that if you've not received that freedom today, please do not let this opportunity pass. It's something that's changed my life. You talk to people that have experienced the freedom of God. It's something hard to put into words. But let me tell you, it's the most profound thing that can impact your life. See, for people who have accepted that, for Christians, God has imparted that freedom into your life. It says in John 8:36, a couple verses down, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. See, once the Israelites realized the freedom that they had with God, God then split the seas so that they could walk right through it. Once they crossed, the very fears that held them in captivity for those 400 years, they were then destroyed. See, some of us are stuck and we're between an ocean and an army. We have this fear in front of us that we just can't even get our minds around, and then we turn around and we see this army bearing down on us, and we're just stuck between a rock and a hard place. And we don't know what to do. Guys, I've been there. I know how that feels. It's not fun. You're looking around at people as the Israelites people were doing. What do we do? And what I would encourage you guys to do is don't ask the Lord to remove one of them. Lord, just take away the army and I'll go that way. Or Lord, just take away this ocean or I'll go around this ocean. Don't ask Him to remove one. But ask Him to conquer one with the other. As He did with the Israelites. Guys, honestly, it comes down to knowing who God is. What He does is great. What He promises in His Word are great. We need those. It's so often preached within our churches that, God God has done this in the past, He will be faithful, He'll do this again. Yes, we learn kind of who God is, but how often do you say, God is this? Let me tell you today, God is sovereign. God is freedom. But let me tell you, knowing who God is the greatest aspect of our identity that we could ever uncover. Let me be real with you guys for a minute here. Most of us here, I look around, I recognize most of you here. Some fresh faces. What's up, guys? Looking good tonight. But most of us, we've received Christ, and that's awesome. We're brothers and we're sisters in Christ, and it's tremendous. I hope if you haven't made that decision, that the Lord will be pressing on your heart even now. But in a sense, follow me here. We've made it out of Egypt. We've been redeemed. We've accepted the freedom that's there for us. We've accepted Christ into our lives. He then broke us out of whatever we were in, and now we're walking with Christ, or we're following him out of Egypt. But we've reached this point in our lives where we're unsure. We've gotten to the Red Sea, and God has parted the sea for us. And we look at the walls of the water, we look to our left and to our right, and we're intimidated by the very saving grace of God. Gosh, will these work? Am I safe? Do I trust this? Who am I trusting in? Well, let me tell you this. 2,000 years ago, Jesus won our freedom. It was the single greatest outpouring of grace and of love to ever hit this planet and ever to hit this planet. He broke our restraints when he died on that cross. You see, when you accepted him into your life, you were freed from your fears. Yet now, after we've been trekking, as we've been journeying away from those fears, from Egypt, we turn around and we say, God, we're coming back. And we get scared again. You see, when you were saved, freedom was proclaimed over your life. The restrictions, the walls, the bondage of this world no longer apply to you. And I feel as Jesus is just saying to us tonight, to come identify with freedom. I've got you. Come identify with freedom with me. Yes, it can be intimidating. Those walls of water, imagine the Israelites walking through. Wow, the movies, and they saw like sharks like swimming right next to them. Imagine that. Walking through the waters, and now we can do it in our lives. We can walk through his waters of grace. And I believe he's saying, don't let this world hold you down. Don't be focused on the Israelites coming. I've made a pathway out of this. Walk between my watery walls of grace and allow me to drown your fears. I want to tell you guys a quick story here. It's not a personal story, but it's a story that I actually heard in high school from a non-Christian teacher who told me about it. I thought it was interesting. It applies to the point I want to make tonight. I want to introduce you guys to Hiro Onoda. He's Japanese. He was a guerrilla warfare specialist. And what that basically is this guy was an animal. He could do what he wants. He was the baddest kid on the block. All right, basically what him and a couple guys would do is they would quick ambush a cow or something, whatever, and then they would take the goods and then they would return back. And they were just, the guerrilla warfare is very intimidating, something hard to watch at times, and they were ruthless. But he was a specialist. He was sent to the island of Lubang in December of 1944, towards the end of World War II. And he was instructed to gain military intelligence against the Allied powers, and the Allied powers of the United States. They were England. They were the good guys in many ways. And he was sent there with 3 other men. Actually, he was sent there, he met up with 3 other men that were already there. And it was a jungle, the island. It was relatively small, but a jungle, so it's dense. It was hard. You couldn't just walk straight across it. You had to weave and go around these mountains, and you had to go through it was all jungle with vines and leaves and canopy and whatnot. So he's there for a couple months, and in October of 1945, Hiro comes across this pamphlet, this leaflet, that he finds on the ground, and understand that he really didn't have any connections with the homeland, with Japan. They had been kind of said, go figure out some stuff to protect this island, and kind of we'll see at the end of the war, that's pretty much it. But he comes across this leaflet, and the leaflet is saying the war is over. Keep in mind, 1945, the leaflet was actually true. But it's saying the war was over and Allies had won. The United States had won, England had won. Now understand that he was kind of coming from the perspective of, I need to do this for my country. So he attributed this to the enemy or the allies kind of printing something up and saying, oh, here, kind of leave a bunch of these across the jungle and across the island. And then he'll find one, oh, it's over. So I'll come walking out, boom, get him. So this is his mindset right now. He's starting to lose it a little bit here. But so as time kind of goes on, more leaflets are found, more pamphlets. He keeps finding the war is over, the war is over. After a couple of years, actually what ends up happening is they send planes over top of the jungle, and they're dropping copies of letters from his family saying, the war is over, Hiero, come home. The war is over. Signed by them. Signed by his commanding officer, the one that had issued his deployment, if you want to say. Signed by them. And he kept saying, this is the enemy, this is the enemy, this is no way. No way this is true. For the next 29 years of his life, he kept fighting World War II on this island. He continued fighting for the war by himself. Actually, what ended up happening is that after that long in the jungle, he started to lose it a little bit, and at one point, I think he killed one of his friends, and then the other two left. So he was mentally kind of losing it here. But understand that when you're in that kind of everyone is against me mindset, you kind of see how that can happen. But in 1974, a college student, someone our age, 22, 23 years old, goes and says, I'm going to find this guy, Hiero. You kind of heard about him kind of in the back of the newspapers. And, still no contact made with Hiero, but yet he was actually still defending the island. People would be like, oh, random shots heard in the jungle on the island of Labang. So he was still defending this island 29 years later after World War II. So anyway, this college student goes and says, I'm going to find this guy. He goes to the island, and he spends, I believe it was about 6 to 8 months researching the entire island. Finally, he finds Hiero. Now 30 years older. I think he was 20, so he's almost 50 years old now. Still fighting the war. Finds him and he finds his camp, and somehow he befriends him. And he said, Hiero, the war is over. The war is over. Come home, come home. Hiero still does not believe him and thinks that he's an enemy spy. Doesn't kill him, which I don't know. If he really thought he was an enemy spy, I thought he would have killed him, but he didn't. So what this college student ends up doing, he leaves Hiero, goes back to Japan, and what he does is he tracks down the commanding officer that deployed Hiero, gets the commanding officer, brings him to the island, back to the camp, and says, here's your commanding officer, and he says, we've been over for 30 years. And at that moment in his life, he realized the last 30 years have been a waste. He wasted 30 years of his life living in fear, defending what? Nothing. He was frightened to trust anyone. By the end of that time, he had no friends, no contact with people. They say that his military background, actually, what ended up happening is after 30 years he came out and his uniform was perfect. And I think, Luke, you would know, but they take care of the uniform very well. So 30 years living in the jungle, uniform is perfect. But guys, understand that's 30 years of living in the jungle. So don't go to war, yes. Mm-hmm. But my point in telling you guys this is this. Do not be scared of the war that seems to be raging around you. See, the war is won. It's over. In John 16:33, Jesus says, I have said these things to you, that you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. See, this verse is saying, yes, you will have trials. Yes, you will have times when it seems like you're trapped between the Israelites and the Red Sea. But let me tell you, God is saying, take heart, for I have overcome the world. I have won the battle. The war is over. Guys, walk in the freedom that comes from knowing who God is, knowing His sovereignty, and the freedom that comes with it. You see, once we trust God to that point, where He's holding up the walls of our very existence, that when we come, We come in absolute freedom. He's holding up the walls of water so we could walk through. It says in 2 Timothy, therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. Guys, accepting Christ now gives you the identity of freedom. Therefore, where you go as freedom, you bring Christ, and where Christ is, freedom reigns. Hope you guys understand that tonight. And I wanted to challenge you guys and say, freedom is a part of your life. Christ is a part of your life. Start living like it. I feel like we live sometimes, I know for me, these lives of fear. What's going to happen here? How am I going to do this? What's the next step? Where am I going to go? Who am I going to marry? Who am I going to date? And as I was preparing this, the Lord put something so strongly on my heart. And I want to read it to you guys here. And it's saying, the Lord was saying to me, I see what is going on. I'm looking at your life. I see it. I know. I see the army that you were against. I see the ocean that is in front of you. I hear your cries. Children. The thing that has kept you in bondage for all those years, let me drown that. The guilt, the shame, the sin, the pornography, the reputation, the pride, the drinking, he's saying, let me drown that. The waters of uncertainty, the waters of fear that you are facing, let me split that so you can walk right through it in freedom and in love. Guys, let the Lord split that. Because he's saying that your greatest fears, your greatest worries will be my greatest victory. He's saying, I am sovereign and you are my child. And as my child, you will live from freedom, not for freedom. You accepted Christ, you are now free. For freedom was achieved on that cross. Guys, the battle was won. Don't continue living like Pyro, living like you're fighting this battle. No, the battle is won. And actually the worship team can come back up here. But guys, I hope you know, that especially this week, you guys are on my heart so heavily. I look around, I see you guys, and I have a relationship with most of you, but I don't have a relationship. I want to. But the Lord puts me on your heart, and He has me prepare these messages for you, the sovereignty of who He is, the children of Israel relating that to Him. Guys, know that when the Lord speaks, I am honored by that. I'm honored to be up here in front of you guys, and I believe the Lord is saying to you guys tonight, I am sovereign, you are my child, own it. Own it. Because the Israelite people, when they got stuck, a lot of them were saying, Moses, we should have never left. We should have never left Egypt. We should have never left that bondage. We should have never left, because at least we knew what was going to happen. Let me tell you, that is stupid. To be blunt. The Lord wants you guys to walk in the confidence and the freedom, and He gave me the picture of you guys walking through these walls, and it was amazing because you have the children of Israel, and that was you guys walking through, and Him holding up the walls of your fears as you walk through victorious, as you walk through free. And when the Israelites reached the other side of that water, of that basin, they sang songs and they were joyous and they proclaimed freedom over their lives. They said, God, you are a good God. You are sovereign. You orchestrate all things. Will you stand with me as I just close with this one? It's a couple verses, actually. It's in Romans 8, and it says, for all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. Abba meaning Papa, Daddy. Guys, we serve a wonderful, sovereign God that we can call Abba, that we can call Papa. So Father, Lord, as we enter into this next time of worship, oh God, Lord, I ask that you would make who you are so real to us tonight, oh God. Lord, that we could look into your eyes and say, Abba, Father. That we could walk in your freedom, oh God. Lord, that we could walk in your freedom, Jesus, for we are freedom when we identify with you, oh God. In your name.